Hi everybody, Dr. Suneel Dhand. Welcome to another video. I want to share with you in this video a very interesting experience I recently had in the hospital, which helps put into perspective our modern day struggles, or what we perceive to be our modern day struggles. I was treating a patient, a delightful older lady. She was in her late 80s, and we talked about her medical condition. Obviously, we addressed that first, and then I heard that she had an accent, and I asked her where she was from. And she told me that she was born in Czechoslovakia, what was known as Czechoslovakia at the time. And she was born in an area called the Sudetenland. Many of you may be familiar with that. Big events happened there in the 1930s because Nazi Germany had a claim on that territory, and they had threatened for a long time to invade. And they did so in the late 1930s, and then things escalated from there, and subsequently war broke out, World War II. But she was born in the Sudetenland, which is a very picturesque area. It's right on the border with Germany, and she is Jewish. Her family was Jewish. And she told me that after the Nazis invaded, there was a reign of terror. And she basically spent the next few years moving with her family. Her family moved her from place to place, trying to evade the authorities, trying to evade being arrested, deported, and sent to a death camp, an extermination camp. Can you imagine what that was like for years and years, staying in a place for a little bit and then moving on, going through that constant cycle for several years? She managed to evade the authorities, as did a lot of her family. Unfortunately, a lot of them did perish in the Holocaust. And then after World War II, she came to the United States. And she said to me that as soon as she arrived in the USA, she felt a tremendous sense of relief. And she said that she thinks the United States is a wonderful country, and she wakes up every day blessed to live in the USA. And then we talked for a little bit about the current state of the country, current world affairs, and it really did help put into perspective our modern day struggles. Now, I know I spend a lot of time focusing on the negative, particularly with regards to medicine and healthcare. Quite rightly so. We have a lot of things wrong with healthcare, and attention needs to be brought to these things. And I also think, as I've said in previous videos, that the United States has gone rapidly downhill, particularly over the last few years in a variety of different metrics. Unfortunately, the same thing has happened to many countries, including the United Kingdom. But that still shouldn't take away from all of the good things about living in the USA and how we are blessed to live here. Yes, again, there are many bad things. I don't like the way that big business practically owns the United States of America and all politicians right now. I don't like the way that the pharmaceutical industry owns the mainstream media and also social media. There are lots of things that we need to address, but at least we have a US Constitution, and we still live in a relatively free and peaceful country compared to many parts of the world. Even now, most of the world would do anything to live in a country like the USA or UK. We often forget that. When that patient talked about how in the 1930s and 40s she lived under a reign of terror where her family could be arrested and put to death at any moment, it made me realize that that really wasn't very long ago. The history of humanity is absolutely terrible, and peaceful times are a relatively new invention. World War I, World War II were not that long ago. I remember a few years ago I read a book called A Little History of the World, and it is a great book that basically takes you through the whole history of mankind on this planet. And I started off reading that book thinking I was going to learn very interesting things about civilizations like the Egyptians, etc. And I remember reading right at the beginning of the book a warning from the author that said that basically what we were about to read was going to teach us a lot of history, but it would be quite depressing. And I wasn't sure when I read it what he meant, but when I started reading the book, I realized very quickly that basically throughout human history, we have been in constant cycles of war, people massacring more people, bloodshed absolutely everywhere. That is the whole history of mankind, and we still have those same instincts. Even with World War I, World War II, that was only less than 100 years ago. The object of many families was simply to raise sons who would go off and fight in wars and die as teenagers, die as young men in their 20s for a cause that they barely understood. These times we live in now are very new, and long may they last. Yes, there are many bad things happening in the world right now, but in no way do they compare to the years gone by. So even though I do think that countries like the USA and UK have gone rapidly downhill over the last decade or two, that shouldn't take away with how blessed we are to be living right now. Most of our historical ancestors would do anything to change positions with us and live in countries like the USA or UK. Indeed, most people in the world still would. So coming back to that patient telling me that story, she was a delightful lady, had a very successful life after she came to the USA, raised a family, was a professor at a top university, very educated, very learned lady, and she had been through absolute hell with her family when she was very young. And she feels blessed every single day to live in the United States of America. And it's so important that people like her, there's not many left, still tell their stories regularly, particularly to the younger generation. We don't take things for granted. We must never do that. So yes, human beings are going to complain, they're going to whine, they're going to moan. That is human nature. That is the human condition. But we must always have that sense of perspective. We must always keep learning about history, keep hearing stories from the past, because that, ladies and gentlemen, is our only hope of avoiding those dreadful events happening again in the future.